Hello, I'm Hayley and welcome to Creative Photo Folk. In this week's trick photography project, we're going to work some magic to create some mandala-like structures by making copies of an image and varying their positions and blend to create a result that's soothing in its symmetry and makes the original image look unrecognizable. This is one of those techniques where it's best to run experiments with several different images to see what results you like. And I'll show you different variations as we go along. So this is the first one we'll be working from, and it started off looking like this. So this is an image of a flower that I froze in water and then photographed it. And the only reason I chose it is that it was the most recent thing I'd shot and the only shoot I had still on my hard drive at the time. So it just became the candidate for no other reason than that. So the first thing we obviously want to do is open our chosen image into Photoshop. And you can do that with File and then Open and then navigating to the spot on your disk that your photo can be found, or you could bring it in from Lightroom. Next thing we're going to do is grab the crop tool with C, the shortcut C, or it's the fifth one down on your toolbar. And we're going to drag, actually, let's try that again. I'm just going to change this to WH resolution, which means it won't crop proportionally. It lets you choose which direction you want to crop into, and we're just going to quadruple what we already have pretty much. Now we're going to load our Move tool, which is the top one on the toolbar and activated by the shortcut V, and make sure that the image is in fact positioned on the top left of our canvas. Now we're going to duplicate this layer with Control or Command J, and you'll see there's now a second copy has popped into our Layers panel, and we're going to flip this. So we'll go to Edit, Transform, and then Flip Horizontal, and we're going to drag that new layer into place. Now in our Layers panel, we are now going to, actually just let me nudge that one in with my arrow key on my keyboard, and then we're going to highlight both layers by either Shift or Control clicking, and we're going to right click and say Merge Layers. So they are now blended into one. Now we're going to make another copy with Control or Command J. This time we'll go to Edit, Transform, and Flip Vertical. And then we'll drag that into place. Looking good. Note that the direction you flip your images in and the way they're positioned will make a difference to the final result. So this is something you can experiment with, but you just won't know what you're going to prefer until you run those tests. So now, again, we are going to highlight both layers, right-click, and merge. Now we need to make our canvas even larger. So with the crop tool again, fifth one down or C, we'll just pull it up to about that size. You're really just guessing at this stage, and you can always just go back in and crop to taste. Now, as you can imagine, these files get very big and your computer will start to slow down as we continue to work through this. So at some point, I do recommend changing the image size, and I'll show you how to do that soon. Now, with this layer highlighted, we're going to make another duplicate with Control or Command J, and we're going to hit Control or Command T, which activates our transform controls. Now, something a little different than you're used to is this little angle feature here. So I'm going to highlight that and type in 90 degrees and then hit plus, and you'll see that we have rotated one of those layers. Then we can start having a look at our blend modes, which are found under the word normal, to see if we can find a merge that we like. I like lighten. Soft light's quite nice. Yeah, I think we'll go with lighten for now. So next we're going to make another duplicate of this layer with Control or Command J. This time we will press again Control or Command T to bring up our transform controls. And we went 90 last time, so this time we'll go half of that at 45. Then we will hit Control or Command J once more, and this time with Control or Command T, we will make the angle 90 degrees. So if you're finding that you're not quite getting the same results as I am, the best thing to do is just in your transform tool, don't worry about the angles. You can just move it to a spot that you think looks good, and then maybe take a look at an angle. So if that's close, maybe you want to put in 30 degrees just to make it a round number. But anyway, at the moment we just wanted 2 that were across and then 2 that were diagonal. Just to make it a bit more interesting, we're going to put a background behind it. And I'm just going to choose black for this particular example. So to do that, we'll go down to our adjustment layers, which is the little half pie, and we will choose solid color. I will drag my cursor down to my blacks, which is bottom right, and hit OK. And then I will drag that layer down underneath the mandala we've created so far. Now, it's not particularly interesting at this point. First thing I'm going to do is go back into my crop tool with C and just get rid of some of this dead space. And I will do that by holding down Alt or Option so I can drag the edges in proportionately. And already the document's getting a little bit slow because it has become a bit larger by this stage. Zoom in. And you can see there's some really nice patterns coming out, however. But to reduce that file size, I'm going to go to Image and then Image Size. Now it's huge. This could print up to 51 inches, which is pretty much more than I print my fine art prints. So I might make that about 20, which is still huge, but we'll drop it down to 20 inches at its largest. So it's still not quite a square, but we can fix that later on, and hit OK. And that just means our file size is now a little bit more reasonable to work with. Okie doke, and you'll need to now zoom in a little so you can see it a bit better. So I'm not overly happy with that blend mode light, and it's kind of dull. I want something much more punchy. So I'm just going to experiment with the blend modes, and actually we might start with the bottom one because that usually helps. Now I know that earlier I used pin light, so I'm actually going to work with that. Pin light. So I've actually set all the blend modes of each layer to pin light to get this result, which is quite similar to the one we had earlier. Now, the last thing I will do is to just add some adjustment layers. The first I will add is levels. So adjustment layers are found under your little pie here, and we'll go with levels. Now on the sliders, I will just pull up the top highlights and darken the shadows and the midtones. Maybe about there. The other thing you could do is add a hue saturation adjustment layer, and you could pop up the saturation just a bit. I like that. It really brings out the middle. And so that's our first mandala made. So that's how you create a mandala with a full image. But what if we only want to use part of an image? So now we're going to edit a mandala with a subject only, so not the full image. Now, this technique works well when you have selectable subjects in your image. So flowers and plant matter can work quite nicely, or you can shoot a single subject against a plain black or white background, and then just make a selection of it in Photoshop and remove its original background. So you will never believe what this mandala is made out of, but basically at the time of recording this, the light bulb on iPad trick is very popular, and I'll be recording a video about that soon. But the original image looked like this. So that's what we're going to work with. So you want to open up your image in Photoshop. So I've just opened the original image to show you how to make the selection. So there's several ways to make a selection, and we'll try a couple today to see what works. The first thing we're going to try is our object selection tool, which is the fourth one down on the toolbar. If you hold it down, you can make sure that the top one is selected. And I tend to use rectangle as the mode. You can also choose lasso. And at the moment, this changes all the time in Photoshop. So depending on what version you're using, you can just actually hover over the image and it will detect any subjects. So it's not detecting the whole subject, but it's doing a pretty good job of the rest of it. So I want to say yes to that selection, and I will just hit my mouse button. Then I want to hold down Shift. So Shift changes the cursor to a little plus sign. And I want to say, well, I also want you to add in this bit. So take a second look. Now I'll let go of my mouse and let it have some thinking time. And that's looking good. The only thing that's missing is a little bit of the bottom of the light bulb, and that's because it's in darkness. We'll just try that to see if it wants to play along. Nah. Oh, look, I could go and refine that, but that's going to do. So basically, then we just add a layer mask with this button here, and we have just our light bulb selected. Now, before we start working with this, I'm going to crop it down. So first thing I'm going to do is go to Control or Command T, which is my transform tool, and I just want to make sure that it is horizontally straight, which is about there. You may not have to do that step. And then with my crop tool, so the shortcut C, I will just drag in the edges, making sure that WH resolution is selected so I can freeform drag my crop. I just want to crop it in as close as I can get so that the mandala is more effective and doesn't have a lot of dead space in it. Now we basically repeat the same process we did earlier. So hopping back to our original, we made a copy and flipped it. Then I had the 4. Then I made a copy of those 4 and made it a cross shape, and that first blend mode is lighter color. Then I did one diagonally and made that lighten. Then I did another one, also lighten, and it was diagonal that way. Then I made a copy of that group and twisted it so that we've now got it facing this direction. Then I made a copy of that one and added in all of these. Then I added a solid color black underneath, as I showed you earlier, and I just darkened up, I changed the color a little bit so it matched the outside, and that is how that one was made. Quite effective, yeah? So to show you a few more examples, this one here, show you the original image, was a photograph of a little flower bud in soda water, lit by a flash. So again, that just happened to be the most recent shoot on my computer at the time. And that was, as you saw, the result that we ended up with. So really cool when you've got that black background. But I just wanted to show you some variations. So if I drop out one of my rotations, I get this, which is interesting in itself. Or I can get this. And for this one, I actually flipped the flower buds in the opposite direction. So as I mentioned earlier, it does make a difference how you flip them. So I could have one here where it's facing in, or I could have put it here where it's facing out. And that's how you get your different results. So I certainly recommend trying different options, especially if you find a pattern that you quite like. So that was my final result that I'm fairly happy with. And I just want to show you one last one, and we're going to work through it together a little bit because it's a really exciting one. So check it out. It's cool, hey? And probably my favorite mandala that I've created. So let's walk through it together. So this was the original image. Now it was a bunch of 3 flowers that I photographed on top of a light box. Now that's how I got the white background, but you do not have to use a light box. You could use a lit white background. It wouldn't have to be very big for such a small subject. Or, as I've just shown you, you can cut the subject out and put it onto a white background, but that will work best if you shoot your subject against a light background to begin with. Otherwise, you might get some dark halos. So, I created a almost white background to go behind it. Then I duplicated it 4 ways, as I've shown you, made the copy, which lovely in itself. I really like this pattern. Then my twists, love that one too. But then I made a copy and moved that around to get this one. So because this is such a great technique, let's work through it together. And I might start from this point because you've already seen how to do the flipping. Okay, so first thing we'll do is head to Control or Command J to make a copy. Then we will Control or Command T to bring up our transform tools, and we'll make the angle 90 degrees. And the blend mode I used for this was darker color. Now, so it doesn't get too confusing, I'm going to go back to that original layer in that position, and we'll hit Control or Command J again. This time, when we hit Control or Command T, we will change the angle to 45. And darker color was the blend mode. And once again, we'll go back to the original, make another copy, Control or Command T. And this time, we want the angle to be the opposite, so minus 45. And again, make sure that is our darker color blend mode. So that is our first step. But to get it to look like this, what I will now do is make a copy of all these layers with Control or Command J. I'm going to right click and then hit Merge Layers, just so things don't get too confusing. And now, when we go to Control or Command T, actually let's change that blend mode first to darker color so we can see what we're doing. Control or Command T. And then we can move that into a position that looks even. So what you're kind of looking for is the same even space between things. And I sort of like it with, gosh, there's so many variations, it's crazy. Maybe about there. And this again is probably even different from that original one I had. Look at that. So you can experiment with this in infinite ways. That one was more like that. Now, don't forget to put in your solid color background. So to do that, we went to a little pie again, chose solid color. Now for this one, I am going to use white. So drag it up to the top left and then hit OK. Drag it up to the bottom, but you'll see that these weren't white images. So you can see the edges, and I don't like that. So what I will do is double click that solid color layer now, And see, when you drag it over the image, you get a little eyedropper. So I can actually sample that color, which is a bit of an off blue, and now it blends beautifully. Now, if I do want to make this background more of a white, I could add something like a levels adjustment layer and just pull in the edges to get that white. Super cool. And I'll just add a little bit more contrast. I love it. I think this is great. So that, my friends, is how this technique is done. I really hope you have a lot of fun playing with this one. I certainly have. Now, inside my course, Photo Fanatics, you will receive this project as well as 70 plus others, which is always growing. And inside the membership, you not only get this video, but you also get step-by-step instructions and screenshots throughout the process, so you've always got something easy to reference. Thanks for spending time with me, and if you enjoyed today's mandalas, be sure to like and subscribe for more exciting projects. Happy creating! Thanks for spending time with me today, and if you enjoyed